Hi everyone, my name's Heather. I'm a nutritionist and a GAPS practitioner. And today I'm doing a video on the top 3 mistakes people make when healing their gut. So I'm hoping that if you're on a gut healing journey, these can help you avoid a lot of disappointment and frustration, and I really think they will. And by the way, I've done these all by myself, and pretty much everyone does them. So if you've done them, you're not alone. But hopefully you can learn from these experiences and kind of change your path a little so that you can get maximum recovery and healing and get the most out of these foods that you're making and buying. Okay, so the number 1 problem that I see all the time and hear about is people having bone broth when they have gut issues. They're trying to heal their gut, so what does everyone say? Have bone broth. Even the experts say it, and this is really where the GAPS protocol, Dr. Natasha McBride and Becky Plotner, those kind of head the GAPS protocol and all the education, they have really pioneered the way to make bone broth an actual healing food. So there's an undeniable link between irritable bowel syndrome type diseases like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease and histamine intolerance. It was like in the 90-something percentile link of people who had ulcerative colitis who also had histamine intolerance. So a lot of those people are extremely sensitive, and the symptoms of that are pretty severe. It's like consistent bleeding, diarrhea, people have to be on medication. It's quite severe and can be damaging. People often have to have surgeries, so it's really not something to like mess around with. So if you have that type of severity in gut problems, you really want to be aware not to have bone broth, because bone broth is, okay, it's a product. Let's say you put bones in a pot with water and you cook it 12, 24, 48 hours. So there's a few problems with that, but one is it is really, really high in histamines because the longer you cook it, the more it increases in histamines. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you have gut issues, you also likely have that histamine intolerance, meaning this food that you're consuming that's supposed to be really healthy and healing your gut is actually going to cause a lot of inflammation and problems and potentially make your symptoms worse. So this is problematic because people who have like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's or something, they hear about GAPS, they want to jump on, maybe they read some blogs online, probably outdated ones or people that actually aren't trained in GAPS, and they go, okay, I need to start making bone broth. So they make this bone broth. It's crazy high in histamines, crazy high in glutamine. These are substances that they cannot break down properly because their gut is compromised at that stage. So we do not want you having bone broth. It's going to give you a ton of irritation, and it's going to make your whole journey really frustrating because look, everyone's saying you should have this product, but you can't consume it. So then you feel like you're in this corner by yourself, not able to do the one thing that's supposed to help your gut. So instead of doing bone broth, if you need healing in your gut, we recommend meat stock on the GAPS diet. And the difference is with bone broth, it's usually pretty much bones, and they could be from like a previously cooked chicken, or they could be fresh, whatever type of bones you have, and you just cook them long term. Where meat stock, people often call it like a meat broth, it is you're using really meaty bones. They're fresh bones, so they haven't been previously cooked. So that could be a whole chicken that hasn't been cooked, a leg of lamb, also bucco, oxtail, something like that. It's fresh. You put it in a pot of water, you bring it to a boil, and you simmer it from somewhere from like 1 to 4 hours. So in that case, it's a really meaty product. It has a lot of those proteins in it, and it is not high in histamine because of the short cooking time. So it's much easier to digest, much easier to incorporate if you have those irritable bowel syndrome, irritable bowel disease type problems, or if you have histamine intolerance. So we get rid of the bone broth and we switch it out for meat stock. And just a side note, depending on your severity of symptoms, you may have to start with a very, very small amount. So I often recommend people start with like an ice cube amount, which is obviously quite small. And many people can't even tolerate that. So you might have to switch what type of meat you're using. Obviously, if you have any type of colitis or Crohn's or something severe or histamine intolerance, you're used to having a lot of food sensitivity. So you may have to play around with what type of meat works for you at the moment and just make sure you're listening to your body. Okay, the second problem I see a lot is too many fermented foods. If you have any type of gut issue or histamine intolerance, food intolerances, autoimmune disease, really any health problem, I recommend starting very slow on the fermented foods because they're super strong. So often people go like, oh, I'm healing my gut. I'm gonna all of a sudden have a few tablespoons of sauerkraut with every meal. I'm gonna drink a bottle of kombucha or water kefir, or goodness gracious, start with like a glass of milk kefir, which is the strongest probiotic food in the world. So don't do that. That's crazy. I've had so many clients just like jump to that, feel way worse, similar to the bone broth thing. And then they're super frustrated and defeated because the other thing that's supposed to be healing their gut, they can't tolerate. They feel like this odd man out and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm this crazy specific case. There's no hope for me. And that is just the worst thing ever. So we start super small. This is where it's good to work with a GAPS practitioner, but start with a drop, see how you handle it. Increase to 2 drops. Slowly listen to your body. I just had a client, she couldn't handle the fermented foods at all. And then I recommended, letting it sit for a long time to decrease the histamines. And she just started with a drop. She's severely histamine intolerant, but she started with a drop. She worked her way up. Now she's handling 2 teaspoons a day, which might not sound like much to you, but I guarantee that is a huge amount of probiotics, and it's actually doing a ton to restore the gut lining. So don't despise the days of small beginnings with your fermented foods. Do not think you need to be like consuming this huge amount. It's probably going to make you backslide and end up way worse. The third problem that I see a ton when people are doing a gut healing journey, and I am so guilty of this, or I was guilty of it in the past, is not enough variety in your probiotics. So people will go, oh my gosh, sauerkraut, this is awesome. Or, oh, kombucha. And then they'll just stick to that one fermented food, which probably has a ton of probiotics, but it's not having a ton of variety. So sauerkraut has like 2 dominant strains of lactobacillus, which is great, but there's also many different other families of bacteria that are extremely helpful more to your gut and to your bowel, where lactobacillus isn't actually that helpful to your gut. So sauerkraut is great, but you just don't want to limit yourself to like this one fermented food. And under this category, I would also kind of put the problem of people avoiding dairy. I often hear like, oh, dairy's inflammatory. Okay, if it's coming from feedlot cows that are given hormones and antibiotics and fed nasty GMO food, and then their milk is bleached and pasteurized and homogenized, ugh, disgusting. Okay, sure, that's going to be inflammatory in your body. But there's a huge difference between that type of dairy and let's say you get milk, we call it bath milk in Australia because it's not for human consumption, which is raw milk from healthy cows that are grazing on grass. They're out in the sun, they're drinking clean water. They're not just given routine antibiotics. They're not over milked. They're not given hormones. That milk is so clean, different. It has enzymes to break down the dairy proteins and the dairy sugars. It is actually a super healthy food. And then when we take that one step further and ferment it into either homemade yogurt, homemade sour cream, or homemade milk kefir, it becomes the superfood of superfoods. So it really drives me crazy when people post studies about how dairy is inflammatory, and the dairy that they're using in the studies is like this disgusting cow, what's it called? Feedlot kind of nasty dairy, where homemade, fermented, clean, beautiful raw milk dairy is like such a superfood. So yogurt in particular has very different strains of bacteria to your fermented vegetables like your sauerkraut. And then we take it a step further and we can have homemade milk kefir, which has 60 to 70 beneficial strains and species of beneficial probiotics in the yeast form and the bacteria form. So I often say like an ocean or like a rainforest, we want that diversity. If you wanted to repopulate an ocean, you don't just throw a bunch of tuna in there. You would want to throw the plankton and the whales and the tuna and the sharks. You want all of that to create a healthy environment. And our gut is the same. We want variety because they all do different and important things. So if you can have, maybe you have some sauerkraut and then once a week you have kombucha. You also have milk kefir from time to time. That is going to be repopulating your gut with a variety of beneficial things that can work together to give you the healthiest gut. And in terms of dairy, people avoiding dairy is extremely high in bifidobacterium, which is very important for your gut and your bowel. It is also high in beneficial E. coli, which breaks down lactose for people who have lactose intolerance. It breaks down casein. And so these can be extremely nourishing, nutrient-dense foods. So those are the 3 problems I see. That's people are doing bone broth instead of meat stock. They're doing way too many fermented foods for the stage of healing that they're at, and not enough of that variety. I've just started including kefir daily in my diet, and I feel so much better. And that's because I'm getting that huge variety, where I can get lazy just like you guys and kind of just do like sauerkraut or kombucha. but I'm really loving getting that raw milk kefir in my diet that is homemade, that I make daily. And stay tuned for the next video because I'm actually going to talk about specifically why you want to include milk kefir in your diet, and I'm going to compare it to some of the top therapeutic probiotic brands of supplements and show you if they're worth it or if milk kefir beats them. So stay tuned for that.